Welcome to Amadon Planet. Good talk, real learning, better teaching. I'm Joel Amadon. Let's get started. Today on episode 141, we are getting better at teaching by connecting math, culture, and community in meaningful ways. We're doing that in a conversation with Dr. Siddhi Soni and Alyssa Harbin, who are going to join me to talk about their article, Quilts Ethnomodeling Task. Lots to unpack there. But it's found in the Mathematics Teacher Learning and Teaching Pre-K to 12 journal, which is published by the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics. It's an exciting conversation that has a genesis on another podcast, a teaching podcast. But we'll get into that in the conversation. But before we dive in, if you're enjoying Amadon Planet, the best way to support this work is to like, subscribe, and leave a review. It really helps others find these conversations. Some of you have been doing that because people are finding the conversation, so thank you. You can also, if you want to support, share the podcast with a colleague, maybe someone that wants to try this task or someone that you want to learn more about barn quilts with. You can also reach out with ideas or questions by sending me a note to joel@amadonplanet.com. Or one more way to support is you can join my email list for updates and ways to engage further. You can find ways to do that at amadonplanet.com. Thanks for being part of this gathering. Now, let's get into today's conversation with Dr. Siddhi Soni and Alyssa Harbin. Siddhi and Alyssa, welcome to Amadon Planet. How are you, Siddhi?
Doing well. How are you, Joel?
Good. And how are you, Alyssa?
Doing great today. Thank you.
Awesome. So we're going to jump into this conversation, but before we do, just to give a little context of who both you are. So could you share a little bit about yourself? Siddhi, why don't you start?
Sure. So I'm an assistant professor of mathematics education at Eastern Connecticut State University. This is my first year here, and then prior to this, I was at a different university in Connecticut, and then worked for a couple years at a university in New Jersey. So been a little bit all over the place in the last couple years.
Yeah. And then before that, you were at...
I was at University of Central Florida. Yeah,
Okay.
so that's where I did my PhD.
And that might be a logical transition to Alyssa. Alyssa, can you
Yes,
share a little bit about yourself?
Of course, I am a PhD student currently in the mathematics education track at the University of Central Florida with Dr. Bush, who's my chair, and I'm in my second year there. And before that, I was an elementary school teacher, fourth grade, and then math intervention as well.
Nice. Yeah. Lots of great people down at UCF. So we're excited to hear about how maybe all this might have been influenced in the work that we're going to talk about. So we're getting into this, your article from the, you know what? I always it never rolls off the tongue for me yet. Mathematics Teacher Learning and Teaching Pre-K to 12. Like when it was mathematics teacher or math teacher in middle school or teaching children mathematics, those are all, I don't know. But now that they've got one journal, it's all good. For National Council of Teachers Mathematics, hey, the number one math ed practitioner journal, and you all had your article, Barn Quilts Ethnomodeling Task, put in there. And so excited about that, excited to talk about that. So why this article? How did this article come to be?
Sure. So kind of the story behind it, I think November 2022 was when you, Dusty, and Jen Wolf had invited me to the Teaching Math Teaching podcast. And I think during our conversation, I think, Joel, you'd mentioned something about barn quilts in the Midwest and just various patterns that they have. And that wasn't something I'd heard of before. So that kind of made me interested to just see, what are these things about? So I did some research, and turns out that these quilts are pretty simple designs that are just made with polygons. And students are probably familiar with the context, especially if they've lived near farms or if they've lived in the Midwest or been in the Midwest. And so started doing some more research and thinking about how to bring the historical and community connection into my work with elementary pre-service teachers. And so a few years ago, I received an early career grant that was sponsored by NCTM and AMTE. And Alyssa was a grad assistant on that grant. And so we worked on writing up this task where students would learn more about American barn quilts and the traditions, and then create their own quilt to share about themselves and their families and their communities. And so that's kind of where that task came from. And so I did it with my pre-service teachers at the elementary level, and then Alyssa engaged her elementary students in that. So that's where like the article that we wrote focuses on the work with elementary students.
Well, and to go back a little bit, your work has been in well, and so why did when the mentioning of barn quilts and this idea of things that are put together through and I would mention barn quilts are like if you look at a barn right underneath kind of like where the hayloft or right above where the hayloft might be is this either square could be off kilter so it looks like a diamond but as a some sort of representation of the farm, right? And so, but why when we talked about that, why was that something that sparked? Like, describe some of your previous work too that kind of like leads into this.
Yeah, so a lot of my work since my dissertation and kind of like just the work beyond has focused on ethnomodeling, which is really focusing on the integration of art, culture, history, and mathematical modeling. And so thinking about how do we really bring in like people's identities into our math spaces and in ways that are both really meaningful and really authentically connect to their identities, but also connect to deeper level of mathematics and like really meaningful mathematics. And so the work kind of builds off of ethnomodeling, builds off of Ubi D'Ambrosia's work in ethnomathematics. And then two Brazilian math educators, Daniel Ore and Milton Rosa, connected that and kind of extended that to mo like connecting it to math modeling. And so that's been a lot of the work that I've really been engaging in over the past couple years. And so when on the Teaching Math Teaching podcast, when we were talking about ethnomodeling and some of the work I did for my dissertation, I was kind of thinking about just what other extensions and tasks that I could or connections I could have to these tasks. So I think that was where that barn quilt idea that you kind of pointed out just sparked an idea.
That's awesome. That's cool. So then, Alyssa, how do you enter into this story? Like when Siddhi talks about this or implements the task, and you're like, hey, I want to do that in my classroom. Like I don't know, you pick up the story.
Yeah, so as she said, I was her research assistant on this grant, and I was involved with helping her come up with tasks, or we would be looking through like Business Insider videos and seeing how can we come up with a task from that.
Oh, that's
And to
cool.
me, like City's identity is like she is an ethnomodeler, and I feel like everything she does, she's looking for like how can I turn that into an ethnomodeling task. So that's really cool and inspiring. But with this particular one, the barn quilts, as we were working on this one and she did it, she created this task and implemented it with her pre-service teachers. I was like, maybe I could do it with my students. At the time, I was a math intervention teacher, so I had multiple small groups a day. And I implemented it with third graders, which was a great way to uncover, which I didn't expect this when I did it, but two kind of main themes came from it. One, it uncovered some misconceptions that the students had about what a square is and attributes of polygons. And then, which I can tell a little story about that maybe later. But then, two, empathy was actually really drawn out in this because one of the students created their barn quilt out of polygons, but she really focused on designing something that reminded her of her grandpa who had recently passed away. And so all the other students were really like showed her empathy, and it just really created like a neat dynamic amongst those students.
That's cool. I mean, that is really cool. So, I mean, that kind of jumps us into what are the learnings of this. So maybe describe like what was the task, and then we can describe a little bit about what you all learned. Well, even too, I've learned some things about reading what you all learned within the article. But like, what can you describe the task? I don't know who wants to take that.
Sure. I can take that, Alyssa, if you want me to. So the task started out with students learning about the American barn quilt tradition. And so the modern American barn quilt tradition started in around like the early 2000s in Ohio. And since then, there's like barn quilt trails that have been created all over the United States. So I think almost every state has them. And so it was really cool to be able to bring in quilts that were kind of from around the country, but also quilts and like pictures of quilts that were local to the students. So when we worked with students in New Jersey, we like brought in some examples from that. When we worked with students in Connecticut, I brought those in. When Alyssa did it with her students in Florida, then we brought some of those in. So it was really cool for like they were able to see places that they may have been to or were at least familiar with. And so students kind of looked at those barn quilts and like made like almost like a notice wonder activity about what they saw, what were some wonderings that they had. And so I'll have Alyssa maybe later on share the story about her students because that was an interest. Like a lot of things came up during the notice wonder with the elementary students that were really interesting. And then after that, the students created their own barn quilts that represented themselves, their communities, their families. And so just basically it was very open-ended, like create something that represents you. And then really thought about like what were the attributes of the shapes that they had put in. So if they put in an equilateral triangle, what were the attributes of that equilateral triangle? If they put in a square, what were those? So to really connect back to that math standard about, like learning attributes of shapes and connecting between to attributes and of polygons. And then after that, we, at least with the pre-service teachers, we had them also think about like what do quilts look like around the world? And then thinking about comparing those. So comparing the colors, comparing the patterns, and really thinking about like what are the similarities and how does this quilting tradition really connect us globally. So that was kind of the task in like the overview of the task. We modified it a little bit based on what group we were working with.
Yeah. Yeah. And all right, so that's the task. So like, so we have already kind of dove into like, well, okay, what the task looks like, and then now, like, what was learned? And so, Alyssa, you kind of talked about some things that you learned, and you kind of previewed a little bit, but I don't know if you want to dive in a little bit more about what was learned in implementing, and then also to the synthesizing of your learnings into writing the article.
So I'll start if that's okay, Sadie. So with the children, when I did it, during the notice and wonder, there was like six quilts that we were looking at, six barn quilts, and they were all but one was looked like a square, and then the sixth one, which you can see in the article, was off kilter, so it looked like a diamond. And in this particular group, I had varying levels of achievement. I don't want to say ability, but varying levels. And in this group, you could definitely tell there was a little bit of a power dynamic between one of the boys. And
Mm.
he had said that the one in the top left was not a square. And one of the girls in the group was like, yeah, it is a square. And then I said, well, why isn't it? I asked the boy, and then, or why is it? Why isn't it? And then the girls were like, oh wait, yeah, he's right. It's not a square. Like
Mm.
they just like went to what he had said. And then I had them start telling me what makes up a square, what are the attributes of a square. And through that discussion, realized it is a square. And so I just thought it was very interesting that they just went to what he said, but truly she knew what the attributes of a square was. So it brought up misconceptions though amongst the student who, thought that he knew what it was. And as well in that it brought up like just the importance of, in my opinion, like letting all like probing questions and letting all the students share their thinking and justify their reasoning. And that led the girl who was going back and forth to be more confident in herself and her answer.
Well, just the fact that you didn't just say, no, it's a square. Just tilt your head. Like, I mean, seriously, because, and letting it play out like that and asking those questions, like, they're getting much more out of that conversation than the fact that
Mhm.
just being like, I mean, talk about power. You could just exert your power, like, no, definition, boom, that's a square, like, that's good. I
Yeah.
mean, that's a great teaching move. What
Yeah.
else?
I do have one more thing on that. So with the question, like, have I learned as far as like teaching practices? I think that as teachers, especially in the classroom, we feel a lot of pressure on time to stick to the curriculum and do the exact lessons that the district is mandating. But I was lucky enough when I did this to have some flexibility because of the role I was in. But if I were to go back into an elementary classroom, I would prioritize tasks like this because of the deep learning that occurs during tasks like this. And then also, I do think that ethnomodeling is important to help create a sense of belonging for students. And that kind of played into what we were talking about with the article. And I think when students can see themselves in a task and see others and learn more about different cultures, I think it makes them a lot more interested. The students were like, can we make another one? They were making them with polygons, like the physical manipulatives, but then they wanted to draw it because they wanted to add more detail, and they were like so excited about it. So I would
Nice.
prioritize tasks like this, even with the pressure of mandated lessons.
Well, if you just even think like what you just the story you talked about, the definition of a square, like is going to be much more meaningful having that conversation
Mm-hmm.
than just hey, here's a definite. Just write this down, or like I'm going to repeat it 3 times, whatever. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's not going to be as meaningful as like no, no, no. I remember that time we had the discussion about a barn quilt, which is offers context to it. What other key takeaways emerged?
So I think for me, one of like a lot of my work with ethnomodeling has been with pre-service and in-service teachers as the participants. And so when we did this and when we were thinking about just how do we implement this in an elementary classroom, it was interesting to just have a lot of conversations with Alyssa, who was in the classroom at the time, to really think about, okay, like this aspect of the task will work. This aspect may not work with that, like with the group of students that she had. So like for instance, like with the pre-service teachers, I can tell them, like, here's, barn quilts, like go and research the history of it. And they have the tools to be able to just go and research like what do barnacles look like beyond like the 5 or 6 examples that I show them. Whereas with like the elementary students, that may not be the case. And so it's like, how do we really provide some of those scaffolding, or how do we modify the task based on like the group of students we're working with? So I think that I was able to learn a lot from just working with Alyssa on that. And then also just thinking about, yeah, like I think like the student belonging and like that aspect too, right? Like what does that look like at the pre-service teacher level, and why is that important at the pre-service teacher level? And then also at the same time, like what types of opportunities does it create for students at the elementary level? Um, and so I think those a lot of things that I hadn't really thought of before because I hadn't engaged elementary students or secondary students in those tasks. And so I think it was nice to just have intentional conversations with someone who's in the classroom.
Well, and for me personally, like the idea that you took something that I had, seen as part of my, like we go up to Iowa all the time. We go to this camp up in Iowa and we pass like so many of these barn quilts and seeing them and not seeing them, but not like knowing about them. You know what I'm saying? Like, and having you like for this article, like doing the research and like helping me understand like, well, what's the point, and also too the ability for then to think about the representation it could be for a family or for myself or for well, like Alyssa, like you're saying, a lost grandparent. Like that's kind of amazing that now I'm making choices about polygons and their attributes in order to help represent not only like me but an emotion or like a loss, and like it's pretty powerful how we're then putting these principles together in order to help you know represent a little like learn about something I'm seeing, but then also to help me represent something about myself. That's powerful stuff right there.
One more little thing that was a good learning experience for me as a doc student was just the writing process with Siddhi.
Oh
So we
yeah.
would sometimes be on Zoom and editing something, and sometimes I would just, a lot of times I would say, "Can we do it together? Can we edit it together?" And she would help me, and or I'd see like some of the edits she was making in real time. So that just helped me. This is the first like publication I have as second author and or in general. So that was a good experience for me.
Well, and I don't think, I mean, and Frank, this, and City, you can answer this too. Like, this doesn't get published without you doing the work with kids, right?
Yeah. No, it was definitely a joint effort.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and so like, what are some of the things that when you saw the what the kids or even the pre-service teachers they're creating with the quilts, like you talked about the representing of the grandparent, but like, what are some other things? Like, how did you see like them using this opportunity to express themselves through barn quilts? What are some highlights there?
I think some other things that came up with at least the pre-service teachers were they started sharing about not just quilts, but in general, like just different traditions relating to like crocheting or weaving,
Mm,
that like their families may have done. Or like either, like it's like, oh, like my grandmother passed down this quilt to
mm,
me, or like I had a student who shared like her that their grandmother makes a quilt for every member of the family, like a newborn member of the family. And so now that the grandmother is like getting of age, the like all the grandkids are essentially like putting a quilt together for her. And so it like created a lot of these like cool connections where they were bringing their stories into the classroom. And that often doesn't happen in mathematics, and there's not often space in a math classroom
hmm.
where we allow students to just share like the human part of them. And so it created these really cool connections between the students where they were able to see that, there's a lot more connections that they have among each other. And I think so when I did it, like this was one of the first tasks that I did with the pre-service teachers in the semester. And so it really created this cool like community, like sense of community building that they were able to have and like an experience that they were able to have. And the class that I did it with for at least for the grant was a synchronous online class. And so sometimes it's already hard to build that community online
Yeah.
when they're not seeing each other face to face and you're not able to have like that side banter with them, things like that.
Hmm.
And so I think like that was like an added benefit where we were able to create a community through these tasks.
Nice.
There were also some of the students who I remember looking through the data, and I remember students saying like, "Oh, I picked these colors because it's my favorite football team," or "I picked this color because, or this shape to represent my sister and my brother, and then these polygons to represent our parents." So and that was neat to see that they were able to talk about their family. Like Siddhi said, that's not normally something you do in the math classroom, and hopefully they'll take that into their future classrooms. And then there was one student who made a design that looked like checkers, and we both laughed at this. They had to do a little write up on what their design represented, and she said, "This reminds me of the good old days when I used to play checkers." And she's 8 years old, and she's
The
like,
good old
the
days.
good old days. So we thought that was really cute. But she obviously has a fond memory of playing these games with her family, and that's what she did her design on. So those are some other things that came.
Nice. Nice. Um, I think for me too, there was it's in one of the whole the books that are like the lessons to I always forget the title to the it's the early childhood version of the lessons to counter injustice social. You know what I'm talking about those, but I'll put a link in the show notes. They're from Corwin and NCTM. Anyway, one of them is talking about like having creating a like a self portrait using the tiles and things like that.
Oh.
Similar sort of idea, but it feels like it's more contained, and also too it's something that they're seeing out in the world as well. And so I don't know, there is something about the because just to ask somebody to make a self portrait like a drawing, it's almost intimidating. But hey, here's we're giving you some pre-made tiles in
Mm-hmm.
order to, or you can do it online with some virtual manipulatives too as well. But
Mhm.
hey, how do you create something that represents you? And but we're also putting constraints around it because we're using these shapes. So like those are sort of like things that you're talking about, City, like a way to make connections with students in this online environment. but like a way to like, it's a conversation starter that we're all engaging in the same task too, that can do something on top of the math that we're already doing. Like, right, we're building community and we're talking about probably able to have these conversations about the mathematics that go beyond than what we might normally do if it's just so, hey, what's this kind of shape? What's this kind of shape? It's just trivia versus like, no, 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 this is connected to me and who I am. And like, like I'm just even thinking like some of the terms that might come in, not outside of even the shapes, like, oh, you can't see, like I see some of the student examples, like you can see the wood grain of the desk beneath. Oh, this is not a full tessellation because I can see the wood grain. If I can't see the wood grain, oh, now we're talking about something that's tiling the plane, and like there's like this like built-in like vocabulary that you can get into because of the task that's put in front of them.
Absolutely. I mean, I think actually when you also just mentioned the virtual versus the hands-on, that was another thing that we had a very intentional discussion about. Like just so when I did it with pre-service teachers, and since it was online, we used the virtual
Right.
manipulatives. And so that's when initially when I told Alyssa, I was like, hey, they could just do that. She's like, that probably won't work as well with elementary kids. And like I've worked with elementary students, but it's been a while. And she was like, no, let's definitely do like the hands-on manipulatives. But I think like the pros and cons between those, right? So like for some of the pre-service teachers, because they had the virtual manipulatives and we did it using Mathagon Polypad, so there's an option for them to create their own polygon. Like so then they were able to like obviously use the ones that were available to them, like the square, the triangle, um, the hexagon, and all of those things. But then some of them also went out of the box and created their own polygon that they wanted to use, whereas that was, with the elementary students because they had the preset polygons and it was like that's all you have access to. So I think when teachers are implementing it, obviously thinking about the age of the students, but also thinking about like what makes the most sense and what is available to them, based on like I guess what their intention is behind the task.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and then if you did allow elementary students to do that, and all of a sudden they're creating these new polygons, like, okay, so how would we name that? And like, it just creates then
Right.
a need, like, wow, Alyssa created this nine-sided shape. How do we talk about this thing? What is it? Like, is that a nonagon? Is that what it is?
Hmm.
Hey, there we go. I don't know why I know that, but I got it. There we go. Guess I'm a PhD. Any other learnings any other takeaways from? I mean, Alyssa, I like the how you brought out takeaways from like the writing of it too, like wanting to
Mhm.
do that together, and also too like Siddhi talking about the learnings of like, hey, with some best practices with implementation for some elementary students. That's good too. Any other learnings or things that we could take away from this?
I will just say one other thing that just came to mind.
Yeah.
I think that with the physical manipulatives, one thing that I always worried about when I was like starting out teaching was doing tasks that I thought were like too challenging for students, which I have reframed that in my mind nowadays. But I think this task with the manipulatives, it's accessible to everyone. Like there's nothing that about it that is makes a student intimidated to engage with it.
Yeah.
So I think that that was a highlight of implementing it with the students.
Well, and as you point out, like then to have students have their barn quilts now becomes the context like, wow, we saw a lot of, equilateral triangles in, James's barn quilt that's up there on the wall. That the picture of it's up on the wall, and now we can talk about it when talking about the, other things we want to talk about with equilateral triangles, like James has ownership, right? Or we as a class have ownership because we know James, and like their quilt now becomes a point of reference in learning a little bit more about isosceles triangles or whatnot, and or equilateral, whatever I said. And so like having that, and you had in your article at the end, like the quote from Sue, shifting away from contextless portrayals of mathematics to reveal its social and cultural dimensions. And like there we go, like that we're getting at that we can actually put some meaning behind this stuff, and it's not just learning just random facts. Any other learning? I got one more if you got, unless you do. I've been using this as an example for folks. Like when folks talk about like, hey, I've got this task. I want to, I think that there's something to it. I think it should be shared. Like, hey, here's an example of some folks that put a task into play, got some examples from it, and then now wrote it up as something to be shared with others. And I love that the fact that it's here and I'm not saying it's approachable, right? You wrote it in a way that it makes sense. I can go do the task, but then also too, I can be like, oh, I've got a task too. And if I can, make some sense out of it and put some context around it, maybe I can put it out there in the world too. Cause I know that there, MTLT likes to see this sort of stuff, like, right? The
Mhm.
tasks that it's these rich tasks that people can do and use, and it's ready to go right away from within the document. And I appreciate that. And so I've shared it with others. So just so you know, I've
Thank
said,
you. We
hey,
do appreciate that.
pointed at you. If you want to know how to do this, go look at that. Go look at that article. So for any listeners out there, if you've got a good task, hey, go look at the article. We'll put a link to it in the show notes. Um, so after writing this article, have you done differently anything? Have you done anything differently in your own practice, or what would you have done differently now that you've had the kind of the context of thinking about it and synthesizing it?
Alyssa, do you want to get started?
Okay, I was like, I don't want to cut her off. Yeah, I kind of touched on it earlier with doing like not being afraid to do tasks like this,
Nice.
because of the timing and the pressure, testing pressure. But also, I'm a graduate associate at UCF right now, and I teach a math content course for undergraduate students. And I am going to implement this one when I get to the geometry lesson or geometry section of the course. And I think that it's also virtual, so it will really help create that cul culture, cultivate a culture better. And I did do a different ethnomodeling task that Siddhi created as well last year with my students. That was more on data and statistics, and that was really neat to do as well. I was able to see students bring in their own culture. It's I don't know if we'll have a way to share more tasks. I think City's going to talk about something like that in the
Oh,
future, but
nice.
it's called her Cocoa Island task is what I'm referencing. And students were able to learn about like chocolate around the world and bring in their own connections. And so, yeah, I think what I would do differently in moving forward is try to do at least one ethnomodeling task a semester with my pre-service teachers. And then if I go back into the classroom, make this a normal practice. And something that just crossed my mind as I'm reading for my prepping for my comp exams, I'm focusing on STEM and STEAM frameworks right now. And as I was reading something, I wrote on the side, I wonder if ethnomodeling could be like if I were to ever make a framework in 10 years. I wonder if like ethnomodeling could be a way or a part of a STEM or STEAM learning experience. I don't know, just preliminary thinking.
Nice. Nice. How about you,
Maybe we'll
City?
have to talk more about that,
Yeah,
Alyssa.
I
yeah.
think so.
Um, but I think so. Alyssa kind of alluded to this. So one of the things that I'm working on currently, so I had a small grant from my university, and trying to think about creating like a task repository, like an online task repository, for ethnomodeling tasks. So I think one of the things that, like, as I've done these with pre-service and in-service teachers at the university setting, or when I've shared these at like different conferences, teachers are often like, we love this and we want to implement this in our classroom. But one, we lack the resources to be able to do the research and find the authentic research.
Mm,
Um, and also just have the time to be able to that it takes to create these tasks, right? So in order to do it authentically, in order to make sure that there's no like stereotypes that are being perpetuated,
yeah.
how do we find the information that's like true and authentic? And so ethnomodeling at like a lot of the research has been done primarily outside of the US. And so I'm trying to bring in like some of those researchers and then also like contributing my own tasks and creating a repository where it's really thinking about how do we connect these different tasks to the like our US math standards or math domain so that way teachers can really easily implement or like take a task and just modify it to implement in their classrooms.
Nice. Nice. Love that. So you're saying you have started that, or you're trying to
It
get
is
that off
in
the
the
ground?
works. So it is not online yet, but I can share that once it is.
Sounds like a return visit to Amidon Planet. There we go. Fantastic. I mean, and those, man, good tasks are just like, if you've got them, hang on to them and use them, and then, but then also too that price springs to ideas more. And I guess when people are going to do this, they might also say like, "Hey, this is kind of like something else that I see within my community, right?" Or something, some other
Right.
thing, the traditions and things. Well, like even the conversations that you all were having, or that your students were having about other things that go on. There's math embedded within those as well. So that's good. Um, so sometimes again we write something, we put it out into the world, and then we kind of like lose ownership of it, right? And like people are take it up. So do you have any I say major critique, but I just like to think, what cautions might you have for teachers that might want to implement this task, or even too, like you kind of implement, you mentioned something, Siddhi, in your last description, like thinking about, okay, we don't want to perpetuate certain stereotypes or whatnot. So what cautions might you have for people that want to implement this task, or just general cautions in general?
So I think first and foremost, definitely making sure that the information that you're sharing is authentic and genuine so that we're not perpetuating stereotypes or bias. Um, and I think part of that is also just doing the in-depth research, which I agree, like as a like I remember when I was teaching middle school and high school, and that was difficult to do, right? Like I wanted to do a lot more of these tasks with my students. I'm like I don't have the time to really be like
Yeah.
spending hours creating these on a daily basis. And so I think bring thinking about like what are those resources. So Alyssa had mentioned something earlier about the Business Insider videos.
Mm.
And there's like these videos that Business Insider has done where they've gone to different parts of the world and thought about traditions that are like disappearing due to like colonization or just like whatever other reasons. And they've basically like done short videos where they share about a tradition from and like the people of that area engaging in those traditions. And so we've tried to bring in some of those videos into the various tasks that we've done so that students are also able to authentically see like what does like for instance like the chocolate task I think it was like an example from South America where they talked about chocolate being a part of like their religious and cultural tradition. And so now the students are able to hear that from someone instead of it just being like, here's an article, read about it,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
here's me telling you the history of it. Why not listen to someone authentically describe that? Um, and I think another recommendation is even better than the videos is if there's people within the community, so it's parents or just other local community members who can are interested in getting involved, then getting them involved with sharing a little bit more about their culture and traditions,
Mm.
because then you're getting that firsthand authentic perspective.
Yeah. Bringing in those funds of knowledge into the classroom. It's
Yeah.
great. Alyssa, how about you? Any cautions or anything? I mean, you actually put this into play within your classroom. So, one, I guess you said, hey, those physical manipulatives, probably try to use
Mhm.
those. There you go.
Yeah, and then when, as the students are doing the notice and wonder, having like the content knowledge yourself as the teacher to know how to probe them and question them to uncover misconceptions and or address them in a productive way. I think that would be the main thing that I would say.
Nice. Nice.
I think we
Yeah.
talk about this in the article, but I think something cool that Alyssa did, especially with that square versus like, is it not a square? I
Yeah.
think she just took a post-it note and was like, okay, well, it's a square, but if we rotate it, then did we actually change the shape? And so it
Mm-hmm.
was like something simple that was like a classroom supply, but it really drove home the point for students.
I do have to give credit to Dr. Safi for that example. He did that sticky note example to my last spring when I was teaching 3310. He came for one of the geometry days because I was really nervous to teach the geometry lesson for the first time and I had like a broken kneecap. So he kindly came and taught for me and did the sticky note example because even the pre-service teachers, this wasn't in the context of the quilt task, but they had misconceptions about square or not. So the sticky note ideas from him.
And again, like the fact of having some sort of physical representation to talk about, does orientation change what the properties, I guess, of a shape,
Mhm.
right? Does orientation change that? And so, like those are those takeaways. And again, not just being told, no, 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 it's a square.
Yeah,
Trust me,
trust me.
there you go.
One more quick little thing. I have learned a lot through being City's assistant, research assistant on this, is like I had learned in my undergrad culturally relevant pedagogy, but I think that the difference with ethnomodeling and culturally relevant pedagogy is that it does extend beyond just um, like the way I saw it, the way it portrayed to me was like sprinkling culture onto something versus experiencing culture through the content.
Hmm.
And I think that that is what makes ethnomodeling so valuable in the classroom is that they're engaging with the culture as they're also engaging with the content.
Well, would you even go so far, and Alyssa or City, you can answer this, like to talk about it as being like culturally sustaining pedagogy, right? So now that we're teaching about it, so they can actually like just see, for me, like actually knowing about it, I can teach about it. But then too, like when I go back home, I'm more informed to talk about it and to, even or to share this task with folks up in Wisconsin. We're surrounded by barn. Well, actually, I'll talk to my best friend tomorrow morning. We talk every morning. He's a farmer too, and like I'll have more information to share about the barn quilts that are surrounding his farm as well. But I mean, have you
Yeah,
thought about that as
definitely.
being like culturally sustaining pedagogy?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of, yeah, like this definitely connects to that culturally sustaining pedagogy. And I think the cool thing is like you're sharing like your friend who is a farmer. I think oftentimes like some of like when we're thinking about like farming or when we're thinking about quilting, um a lot of times people who are doing that don't see themselves as mathematicians.
Mm,
And so I think when they're able to see this and they're like, oh yeah, like I'm doing math, like I'm a quilter, but I'm also doing a ton of math, like as I'm like whether that's like, like, hey, like I'm thinking about polygons on a day-to-day basis, or
yeah.
like it's just like intuitive that I'm doing, like thinking about that. But I think it allows more people to see themselves as mathematicians. And I think that's like been another cool thing when I've had like folks share with me like, oh, like I shared this with a friend who was like a quilter or who, like was a farmer, and it's like they reacted. They're like, yeah, I didn't know that I was using that much math. And so I think it's been fun to hear that.
Yeah, yeah, that's pretty neat. Um, well, I was going to jump into some questions I used to wrap up. But anything else that we wanted to talk about related to the task or the article? It's good stuff. One thing I did want to mention though, City, just for it's a plug for MET grants, the Mathematics Education Trust grants, like that one you talked about, the one you applied for and won through the one that's associated with AMT and NCTM. It's the Early Career is it Research Grant,
Early career research training.
Early Career Research Grant, which is pretty awesome, and I know that's a fairly popular one people apply for. But there's also classroom research grants. So let's say, oh, I'm not early career research, but I'd like to work with a classroom teacher on a task. There's the classroom research grant. That's one that I got. It's like a $6,000 grant working with a couple teachers at a local high school, and we did some research. We did some write ups. We had the funds that we went to NCTM to the national conference that was in New Orleans. So it was close by. It was affordable. But all those sorts of things and there's so many different opportunities that folks can apply for, even if it's like, I've never been to the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics Conference. There's grants for that to apply for. Anyway, we'll put a link in the show notes to all those opportunities. And if you're of means to support the MET, which anytime you renew your membership or go to a conference, NCTM is very good about asking if you'd like to contribute to the Mathematics Education Trust. So, um, good. All right. So, I like to ask this one. Just Amazon Plant's always about learning how to teach better. What's the best thing you've learned lately to help you teach better? Anyone can jump in this first.
So one of the things that I'm this semester, this is like the first time I'm teaching this course is an international perspectives in education. So it's a course that's taken by all of our undergraduate students, primarily students who want to become teachers, but it's also in our liberal studies program. So we have students who just are interested in the topic and also take the course. And so I think it's been really interesting to learn about education systems in various countries, especially like the teaching of mathematics
Mm,
in various countries, but also just like, what are the access and like equity related issues in education that we may not see as much in the United States, but that may occur in different parts of the world. Or just, like the teaching of mathematics or the teaching of like yesterday we were talking about the teaching of language and like multilingual learners and just how the United States is kind of odd in the sense that we don't really have like students don't really learn a different language other than or like they're not required to necessarily learn a different like another language, whereas in most parts of the world like students as early as kindergarten are learning two, three different languages.
right.
And so it's just been interesting to like really broaden my perspective of what teaching and learning looks like.
Yeah. Nice.
And to stick with the theme of today, I think the best teaching practice I've um, thought about or implemented or will do in the future is really with teaching online this semester for the first time, teaching that undergraduate course online. I really do think the ethnomodeling tasks are the way to bring in more engagement. And there is a word I'm looking for that is just not coming, but um, yeah, I think that that's going to help create the dynamic that is meaningful in an online setting.
Nice. So I'm gonna mention someone like so Francis Su, who you cite in your article. Like he, by the time this one comes out, he'll be on a previous episode of Amidon Planet. We talked about his book Math for Human Flourishing, and he talked about something that I've been thinking about ever since. It's like this moment at the beginning of his classes. He talks about this like moment of enchantment because he talked about like one of his math classes is narrow in its topic, but then he's like, he didn't want to just leave folks with only having what is in the syllabus for like objectives. So he talks about how these like, hey, here's math in all these different areas and things, and maybe even like barn quilts, right? And so there's like moment of enchantment, and he found like not only like, hey, it was good for him because he got to like talk more about math in other areas, but then also too, people stop showing up late to class because they're like, oh, I don't want to miss the moment of enchantment. And
Oh.
I didn't think he called it the moment of enchantment. He described it as that, but I don't think it like a math moment or whatever. And so that's something I've been thinking about. Like, what does that look like? How do I do that? I do something, but it's definitely not enchanting. So like trying to think like what does that look like? Um, One other thing I like to ask is I've been in one of my midlife, well, maybe I'm past midlife now, but one of my mid crises was to start getting into like physical media. So like albums. I mean, I'm always into books and stuff. I love books and talk about like writing in books and things, but also yeah, music albums or now even like physical movies like Blu-rays and DVDs and whatever. So if you had the opportunity to, if you had a piece of physical media, what is something that you would like to put in somebody else's hands? Like what is something like that meaningful to you that you would want to like, hey, read this, listen to this, watch this. Like what is a piece of physical media you would love to put in somebody else's hands because it's meaningful or just something that you find joy in? I don't know. However you want to interpret it. Going back to like the importance of physical manipulatives, right? So like there's something about having it in your hand.
So I'll let you take this one first.
Okay, I'll go first. I unblurred because I have this book. I did not know what to say, but as you were describing the question now verbally, I thought this is my favorite book. And I bought multiple copies of it to hand out. So that is why this is Love Does by Bob Goff. It's a
Yeah.
wonderful book.
I met Bob Goff, and I think that might be episode 2 or 3 of Amazon Planet. He did not come on to talk. I just talked about it myself. But he
That's
came
awesome.
to the University of Mississippi. But I love that book. That's a great one. And it's
I
like
actually
someone
met
that
him
you
too. I
nice.
forgot for a second. I was like,
That's
that's
fun.
so cool. I was like, wait, I met him and his wife for a brief second.
We could call him right now. His phone number's in the back of the book, right?
That's very true.
We could try that. Anyway, City, how about you?
I was like, I don't know that I have a favorite book. I definitely listen to a lot of podcasts, like on my drives to work. So I have about a 35 to 40 minute drive to work. And so the Teaching My Teaching podcast and then the Amazon Planet ones are definitely ones that are on the list. Um,
Thank
I
you.
think other than that, um, I think one of the books that I guess I'm looking forward to reading at some point this year is Atomic Habits.
Oh, yeah.
So no, that's been around for a bit, but it's been one that has been on my list. So I want to definitely pick it up sometime in the next couple months and
I
get
think
to reading.
that was an early episode of Amazon Planet as well. But I don't think I knew what I was doing at that time, so it might not be as good as hopefully these are. That's good. Hey, shameless plugs. Um, Anything else to share, or if people want to keep learning with you, where can we find you?
I think one thing that I would definitely like to share is if people are interested in doing ethnomodeling work or just, creating
Mm-hmm.
tasks or even if they're like, hey, like we saw this task and we want to learn more about it, definitely reach out. I'm always happy to share. Obviously, once a digital repository is out, then that'll be a place to definitely be able to share more about ethnomodeling and more tasks. But even before that, like if folks are interested in collaborating or contributing to that digital repository, definitely reach out.
So I'll put a link to your page at your
Yeah,
university. How about that? Sound good?
yeah, that sounds great.
All right. And Alyssa, anything besides like wanting us to give you good thoughts as you talk about doing your comps? So we can give you that. But anything else to share?
No, yeah, definitely good thoughts for my comps coming up. I'm on the countdown now.
Nice, nice, nice. Well, thank you so much for spending time on Abaddon Planet, sharing all this that you've done, and just again, putting it out there for others to use, but then also to inspiration for those to do good tasks and maybe some future ethno modeling tasks out there as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
There is my conversation with Dr. Siddhi Soni and Alyssa Harbin. Now, before we wrap up, I just want to provide a little reflection question. This is all about learning how to teach better, and part of learning how to teach better is reflecting a little bit. So we heard this conversation, we saw what they did. Now let's get a little time to process. And maybe this is a question that you might use with a colleague or a friend, or maybe it's something you just think about on your own. All right. So here we go. Here's my question. What mathematical patterns or practices already exist in your community? Stuff like barn quilts, right? That could become meaningful tasks or exploration for those you teach. Something to think about. Could be that maybe you come up with the next task that could be featured in the NCTM journal, Mathematics Teacher Learning and Teaching Pre-K to 12. Again, that just doesn't roll off the tongue. Got to work on that. Anyway. All right. But one more thing. I'm going to do the physical media of the episode. Again, I just love thinking about sharing an album, movie, book I've been listening to, watching, or reading. Today is going to be a book. Small way of making connections. And if I'm being honest, it's just a way to celebrate physical media, the kind that pulls you off the interwebs for a bit and helps you be just a little bit more present. I'll tell you this, I've been doing a lot of reading lately. I've just been trying to prioritize reading. And one book that I want to share is How to Be Perfect, The Correct Answer to Every Moral Question by Michael Schur. He's the creator of The Good Place, was a writer on, co-creator Parks and Rec. Right? He's definitely a writer. Anyway, New York Times bestseller. It's the probably if I knew anybody that was into philosophy, right? Or even just like marginally into philosophy. Yeah, actually, yeah. Not the hardcore philosopher, this is probably not the book for them. But somebody that, hey, you've had philosophical conversations with them, and maybe it's just about what does it mean to be a good person? Michael Schur thinks deeply about that question. And in writing The Good Place, was trying to make it as accurate as possible to certain philosophies that exist out there. And I'll tell you, I've learned a lot about philosophy. And also, too, I had a good time doing it because it's fun. It's funny. There's good use of footnotes, good comedy pieces. Even in the acknowledgments at the end, all of a sudden he's entering in like comedic things, like random facts and like random untrue facts about Like, did you know moose have birthday parties? And then at the bottom there's a footnote and like, no, there's not. Sorry, spoiler alert if you're waiting to read the acknowledgments all the way at the end of the book. But my sister-in-law gave me this book. It was sitting on my shelf for a while, and I am so excited that she did give it to me. I'm excited to have read it, and also I'm excited to put this in the hands of someone else because it's a good book. It's a good one. So there we go. Physical media of the episode, How to Be Perfect by Michael Schur. And we'll put a link in the show notes just in case you're looking to pick it up. One of those links from bookshop.org that if you purchase it, you're supporting independent bookstores, but you're also supporting this podcast. All right. That's it for today's conversation. Show notes are available at amazonplanet.com /episode 141. Lots of great links there. Tons of links. Not only to the sites, and eventually if we get access to the database that Dr. Soni mentioned, we'll put a link to it there. But anyway, lots of other links there. Go ahead and take a look. AmazonPlanet.com /episode 141. Thank you so much to Dr. Siddhi Soni and Alyssa Harbin for sharing their time and expertise, and also for putting their work out in the world and trying something out and then getting it and disseminating it through the NCTM Journal. That's awesome. Thanks to Matt Middleton for the music in this episode. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, or share it with a colleague. It really helps more folks find these conversations. You can also reach out with ideas, questions, or opportunities by sending me a note to joel@amazonplanet.com or join the email list to stay connected and keep the conversation going. Thanks again for spending time on Amazon Planet. Good talk, real learning, better teaching. Peace.